On behalf of the Center for International Studies, I'm John Tierman, Executive Director, and welcome. This is a very fine event to begin the year. We scheduled this, as you might suspect, to coincide with the commemorations about the 9/11 attacks. And I expect that Dana and Bill's book came out also with the same thing in mind. The commemorations that I've been hearing on radio and on television and the newspapers, by and large, have been what one would expect at a time like this. They've been interviews with survivors, interviews with family members of victims, and so on, and all very important ways to commemorate what happened 10 years ago. But there hasn't been much about what the events of 9/11 and the reaction to the events of 9/11 by the United States government really has been domestically in this country, what it has done to us and our society, the way we're governed, the way that we seek security. And that's what brings Dana Priest here today. We wanted to have maybe a more sober, critical view of what has happened in the last 10 years with respect to the reaction to 9/11. Dana Priest is a longtime reporter now for the Washington Post. She is a recipient of 2 Pulitzer Prizes for her reporting. She has become, over these last few years, certainly one of the very top investigative reporters in the world, really. And this last achievement with William Arkin, who is a columnist for the Washington Post, I think, as you will find, of course, we have books for sale over here, and I do urge you to pick it up. This is a highly readable, insightful, and in many ways remarkable piece of reporting. What they have done here is uncover, as she will explain to you in a few minutes, the extent to which this reaction to 9/11 has gripped the nation, gripped the U.S. government, state governments, local governments, and so on. And it's just a remarkable piece of work. So I do urge you to get the book, see the Frontline documentary, which is likely, we think, to be shown tomorrow at the Brattle Theater at 2 o'clock, and the producer of the Frontline documentary, which featured this book, and Dana, will be there as well. Just before we bring Dana up, I want to remind that we have, at the Center for International Studies, we have events like this, maybe not quite this good, but we have events addressing international issues on a regular basis, and you could check our calendar, mit.edu/CIS. The calendar is there for you to see events. In the future, we have one on Monday at the center in E40 on Palestinian statehood in the UN by a senior advisor to the Palestinian Authority, Hussam Zumlat, at 3 o'clock on Monday. And look at the calendar for other events as they come up this semester. So with that said, please help me welcome Dana Priest.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and it seems appropriate that I now have my technology in hand. So, and I haven't used this before, so that's why I want to introduce John and Matt, because they are key to this presentation, because they're going to make all this magic work. I just wrote a book. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about how this began. Because part of what I'm trying to do in my presentations is tell you a little bit about journalism, even though that's not really what I'm talking about. It began because, and the reason I'm doing that is because I think a lot of people have misinterpretations, especially now in the multimedia age where we have let the platform dominate us, and I'm convinced that we need to get the content back into the center field and to use the platforms to serve the content. And actually, my book, but our newspaper series that preceded it was a multimedia effort from the start, but determined, like I say, to have the facts and the reporting the centerpiece and have the media platforms serve the reporting to deepen it and make it just a richer experience. This began really out of beat reporting that I did for the Post for many years on the military, but then the CIA after 9/11, and in which I and a handful of other national security reporters in the country began to uncover some of the most controversial elements of the Bush administration's so-called war on terror, and those would be the CIA's rendition flights, where they flew detainees from one country to the other, the harsh interrogation techniques that the president and his legal advisors allowed the CIA to conduct against detainees in the hopes of gaining information, and the secret black site prisons that they were put into basically disappeared off the face of the earth in order to keep them in isolation, in order to break them and to gain information from them. All of those things were part of a program, part of what is the largest covert operation program in the history of the agency, even during the Cold War, codenamed Greystone, and within that having hundreds of different compartments, all of which required lots of support, lots of cover, lots of people. And there is where you begin, or where I began, to see the development of things that didn't exist before 9/11 all around Washington. And for everything that I saw or thought I saw in the CIA world, there were 100 of those sorts of things in the military world, because the agency, even though it gets a lot of attention, is a little teeny speck compared to the elephant of the military world. And so there would be people I would meet that would have new titles from new agencies, and I knew that something was happening, but couldn't hope at that time to understand how big it was or what it meant. And my friend and colleague Bill Arkin, who lives in basically a barn in Vermont, was seeing the same thing, but in a very different way. He's a document person, obsessive compulsive by his own description, which is the best thing if you want a good researcher, someone who likes to make lists and lists of the lists and dissect the lists and all that sort of thing. So he began to see this world through his documents. And when I'm talking about documents, I'm meaning things like contracts, not just defense contracts, that's the easy stuff, but like contracts for electricity, and the fact that huge amounts of electricity were used up in certain locations around the Washington area that no one had put a name to, or contracts for ultra-secure circuits, communication circuits from one office to the other, which I'll get into that fun story later. And job boards. So the internet age had created a thing, a place where you can look and see all of the top secret jobs that government is asking to be filled. And if you were to go on that super secret site, monster.com, and put in the words top secret, when you get out of here, you'll see the same thing. Probably thousands of jobs by corporations all over the country who are looking for people with top secret clearances. And they don't just stop there. There were incredible descriptions from those jobs. There were code names of programs that they were requiring people, job applicants to have knowledge of. And in some cases, there were descriptions, pretty vague, but not that vague, of what those programs might be. And so he cataloged all that and kept track of all that And then at some point when we decided we would join forces, we said, well, how are we going to actually show this world? Or first, how are we going to find it, and how are we going to show it? And we decided that between the two of us, with me being more like the human source gatherer and him being more the document technology person, that if we combined forces, we could maybe make some inroads into describing what we saw around us. So the first thing we decided as a methodology was to not only collect all this information, but to try to geolocate it, because I knew from the secret prison stories that I did that everything lives somewhere, no matter how secret it is, and no matter what kind of, many cover organizations, they still have an address, and the address is linked to something like a corporate record. In fact, I found the rendition flights because in Denton, where one of the planes was leased from, I came to this courthouse, or the courthouse in Boston, to find the initial corporate records on that, which led us to a group of false names, which led us to a group of P.O. boxes in the Washington area, which turned out to be the drop boxes for the CIA and a whole huge cover operation that it had. So everything lives somewhere. And so we decided that we would try to get addresses for everything. And we started slowly, but after a while, after the methodology got a little sharpened, I want to read you how quickly things moved from there. Shortly after 9/11, Bill Arkin, the co-author, began to notice numerous changes in budgets, hearings, and military directives he had discovered. Colorfully random two-word titles began to appear. Nonsensical phrases like busy lobster, fervent archer, and scarlet cloud. The names of military operations such as Brave Warrior, Justice Assured, and Freedom Eagle all made a statement about political purpose and resolve. But Titrant Ranger? What did that mean? Arkin's way of dealing with this proliferation of code names was to put them into detailed computer files and study them as a whole. He had collected more than 3,500 of these odd phrases. Skip a little bit. As massive online, here we go. At any one time on monster.com, he could find as many as 15,000 listings for very specialized positions that required a top secret clearance. Between 2006 and 2010, he cataloged 182,000 such job announcements in his files. And the code names in those files linked companies and agencies and activities, and the number of locations doubled, quadrupled, and then doubled again. Unknown locations appeared, obscure agencies emerged, organizations that neither Arkin nor I had ever heard of went from a few to the dozens to the scores. As the focus shifted to organizations, Arkin shifted much of his attention to contracts, which I just mentioned. The bloom of code names and job listings and addresses wasn't meaningful just for its own sake, but for something much larger. Just as the most significant thing about a spiking count of white blood cells was what the blood test couldn't see, the infection that prompted the white cells to multiply in the first place, the top secret jobs and companies and the government organizations they worked for pointed to something unprecedented that had yet to be identified in the body politic. We call this Top Secret America. I wanted to show you a visual version of some of our conclusions before we talk a little more. Roll it. And this is on the Washington Post website, which has a
You think you know America, but you don't know Top Secret America. We're all aware that there are 3 branches of government in the United States, but in response to 9/11, a 4th branch has emerged. It is protected from public scrutiny by extraordinary secrecy. Top Secret America.
This is a closed community, and since 9/11, it's become even more so. the money spigot was just opened after 9/11, and nobody dared say, I don't think we should be spending that much.
It has become so big, and the lines of responsibility are so blurred that even our nation's leaders don't have a handle on it. Where is it? It's being built from coast to coast, hidden within some of America's most familiar cities and neighborhoods. In Colorado, in Nebraska, in Texas, in Florida, in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Top Secret America includes hundreds of federal departments and agencies operating out of 1,300 facilities around this country. They contract the services of nearly 2,000 companies. In all, more people than live in our nation's capital have top secret security clearance.
It's, again, the size, the lack of transparency, and the cost. And if we don't get it right, the consequences are gigantic.
Is this back on? Yes. How do you get a handle on all of this? How do you, I mean, I have to say the reporting on it was frustrating, but it was also some of the most adventuresome things I've done. I'll give you just one example. When Bill found the link between these three organizations through the secure communication circuits, he gave me the addresses of the two agencies close to the Washington area in Roslyn and Crystal City to go check out. So I went there, and the first one I went to was on the 14th floor. It was something called the Defense Policy Analysis Office, which we write about in the book. It's an office that is actually, part of it is a SAP, a Special Access Program, which is even much higher than top secret in terms of its supposed protection. And yet you can find it in these kind of really nerdy, obscure documents. It was on the 14th floor of a building in Crystal City in an underground location where there's a shopping mall and underground, and then above it are high-rise buildings that were originally built in the 60s for the overflow from the Pentagon. And there's still, many of them are used for defense contractors, but more and more they've become part of this other intelligence world. So I went to the building, and there was an electronic directory, and I was looking for DPAO on the 14th floor. And the electronic directory scrolled and scrolled, and it stopped at the 13th floor. So it didn't exist. So I got on the elevator anyway, and lo and behold, there was a 14th floor button. So I pushed the button, rode up to the 14th floor, and, got steeled, ready for big goons or, bodyguards to be there. And when I got to the 14th floor, there was a little guy vacuuming the floor. Walked right by him, turned around, went a couple steps, and there was DPAO's door with all sorts of, security gizmos and cameras and a big sign that says, if you're not authorized to be here, leave, which I did, because I didn't, at that point, we were very early in our research, and we didn't want the government to really know what we were doing yet. So I went to the second building, which is part of this triangle, which was located in Roslyn, another heavily populated office buildings with defense contractors. And pretty much the same thing happened, only this time the directory, this thing was supposed to be on this thing called XIOWS. That was the name of the office I was looking for, which was Air Force Information Operations, which turns out to be what DPAO did, very secret information operations. And if you can tell me what that means, you get a different definition from a lot of different people. And basically it's been, just to skip ahead a minute, a huge waste of money by and large. But I went to that building, and the directory there was almost, again, the XOIWS didn't exist. Went up again, and this time when I got up the elevator, there was a big welcome sign. It said, "Welcome, XOIWS," with a big arrow pointing that way. I went down there, same door, just about the exact same door. So I hightailed it out of there. But that experience on that one day just caused me to think, I've been driving by these buildings for 10 years now and not thinking anything about what they really are. And as I went back through Crystal City, which is a place I'd visited many times as a Pentagon correspondent, it was like an old-fashioned development of a photo where you start to see something and it gets sharper and sharper, and the image then becomes very different than what it was when it was sitting in the chemicals to begin with. I saw most all of the directories were blank. Some of them would have Joe's Pizzeria down there, and that was it. And yet they were directories for 14-story buildings. And there were security guards everywhere that would block off the entrance to certain buildings. And so we went back and did a lot of work on places like Crystal City and Roslyn, and another place that it was very hard to get into any of these, as you can imagine. So I would look for opportunities to get inside of the security complex. I mean, how vague is that? And I had worked a lot with people at the Defense Intelligence Agency. You can pretty much kiss off the CIA. You're never going to go anywhere with them. But the Defense Department is much more open. So the DIA took me, I asked to go to a security class where people learned how to guard classified documents in a conference setting, which made your head spin after a while. In fact, one of the people in the room finally raised her hand and said, "Can't we make this an unclassified conference? Because it's so onerous to keep secrets like that." But that led me into a place called Linthicum, which of course I didn't know existed, in the suburbs of Maryland, which led me to the Linthicum area, the Elkridge area, which is right behind the Baltimore airport, and which looks like nothing I'd ever seen in my time in Washington. And it's so hard to explain because it's rather subtle. But the buildings didn't have names. There were hardly any corporate logos anywhere, even though these were clearly office buildings. They had very blasé numbers. They had certain types of reflective windows. They had lots of cameras. They had guards. They had certain fences, which I later learned were these fences that can survive, an airplane crash basically through them. They go down, 10 feet. And I had stumbled upon what we then learned later on was what we would call the capital of top secret America. It was the National Security Agency located on Fort Meade near the airport, and then all of the sub-agencies and the companies, the corporations that had gathered around the NSA to serve the NSA. And even though it seems like a no-brainer now, at the time we didn't really realize that this is how our map, when we could understand this better, what our map was telling us, that these concentrations were all clustered around the major intelligence agencies, the actual buildings. And the corporations made up a huge part of that. In fact, of the 860,000 people with top secret clearances, about 250,000 of them are contractors. This began after 9/11 when Congress wrote blank checks at the behest of the administration and I would say the public. I mean, nobody knew what was coming next. Everybody assumed the worst. There was general panic. And the intelligence world didn't really understand al-Qaeda that well and didn't understand what they could put aside. So they were panicked. They were trying to do as much as they could, the military as well. Congress was literally pouring money into their coffers, and a good idea or even a mediocre idea could get funding. However, Congress and the president said, we don't want it to appear as if government is growing, even though we're giving you tens of billions of dollars more. So go hire contractors. They'll be easier to hire anyway, and they might even save us money. Well, 10 years later, we know now that they didn't save us money at all. In fact, they're 2 to 3 times more expensive than federal workers. They also were a drain on the federal workforce because they lured away, given those salaries, they lured away an increasingly younger population of intelligence officers. And so right now we have what is the youngest intelligence force that probably the community has had since their founding. And that is because middle grade people left for the good salaries. Places like the CIA tried to put a stop to that in a way by saying, if you don't have 20 years in the CIA and you go to work for a company, don't expect to come back here for the first year. Well, that was barely a disincentive because, in fact, a year's salary for most of these companies was nothing compared to what they could ask for from the government for that person's salary. So lots of people got hired, and for the first year, they just didn't do much of anything except maybe teach that company about the intelligence world. So you saw huge firms like Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics, who are the workhorses of the industrial age, quickly understand that the future was going to be in information and quickly transition into information and intelligence technology, which they all did with amazing speed and a lot of efficiency and some amazing innovation as well. Well, when this started to grow, this thing that we're starting to describe, Congress said, and the president, and first the 9/11 Commission that studied it, said, this might get out of control here. We need to put somebody in charge. So they created the Director of National Intelligence position to manage the intelligence community and the counterterrorism effort. Well, they created the position, but they forgot to give it, actually they didn't forget, they didn't want to give it the power that it needed to do the job. And that's because to give that position the power, you would have to take power away from people who had long-standing power in the government, and that's very hard to do in Washington. And you'd have to take it away from some of the congressional committees, and that's very hard to do in Washington. So they made the position, but they didn't really give him the authority to do what he was supposed to do. And the DNI, as he's called, has been, in many people's view, a failure. In some, I would say it has made some changes in standardizing work product and analysis and that sort of thing. But it's not been a failure in growing, which is something that you could say Washington is very good at. So I'll show you, so I wanted to get an example of this, because part of working in the top secret world as someone on the outside was trying to figure out how I could show it. And so one of the things other than our methodology, we also got obsessed with buildings and the size of buildings, because we figured we can't get inside the building, we'll describe the outside the building. A building is big because it's got a lot of people. It's small because it has fewer people. So we would get the construction company that made the building, and we're very proud of the building. They would put it on their website. They usually talked about its square footage and the different attributes and this sort of thing. And so what the government wouldn't tell us, because they wouldn't tell us anything like how many people worked inside the building, you could find out, or we eventually found out in other ways. So the DNI, which has this new position, isn't working all that well, but it is growing to the point where, there it is, it's 500,000 square feet. That's 5 Walmarts stacked on top of each other. You actually can't see the whole thing. I did several interviews in there, maybe half a dozen interviews over the course of 2.5 years. And every time I did, I would park in one of the parking lots, which was the first thing that really impressed me, because the parking lots were enormous, and there were 2 of them. So before I went to my interview and after I left the interview, I would spend a lot of time driving around the parking lot counting parking spaces in this effort to try to quantify things, because, in the effort to try to make it concrete. So that's the DNI building. The photographer that took that almost got arrested. He got assaulted by the security force, even though he's on he's over, this is winter time when the leaves are off the trees and you can actually see the building. It's an undisclosed location and you're not supposed to know about it because if you did, it would threaten national security somehow. He's in an adjacent office building parking lot taking a picture, and they almost confiscated his film, but he somehow talked him out of it, or he slipped the chip out, is what I think he did. Okay, oops. All right, this is a tiny rendition of a map that's in the book and also on the website. And again, I told you we were obsessed with buildings. So we said, why don't we show the largest buildings in the area? Because I was so impressed with their size. And when you put them next to each other, you get a more accurate view of how large this is. So we cataloged for ourselves the 33 of the larger buildings that were either under construction or built after 9/11. Not before, but after 9/11. And we counted all their square footage, and then we compared it to something that you might be able to understand. And we compared it, in this case, to the Pentagon. And it's about equal to 3 Pentagons. But instead of putting it in one place, because there's really not that amount of land in Washington anyway, it's scattered throughout Washington and its suburbs. But and you can see in the middle there is a rendition of the map for the Washington area. This is one of the first things I saw when I was talking to you about that security class I attended. So of course all my antennae are up as a reporter, and I know that it's going to be hard, and that the details is what the story is going to rest on, because I can't get inside really and describe much of what's inside. So one of the things I noticed right when I turned off the highway was an ordinary lawn sign, like you'd see in your neighborhood. It's for Joe's Cafe, which is a place where they hold career fairs every week for the people with TS/SCI clearances. And there were a couple of those scattered around. So I went to Joe's Cafe, and it looks like kind of a divey cafe, nothing special, except all the posters, instead of saying, big giant Slurpees for sale, it says Northrop Grumman looking for Intel analysts or something like that. And while we were there, one time they were setting up for a job fair. This is a picture of the NSA by one of the NSA employees. It's a place that is I don't know how to describe secret and secret and really secret, but it's really secret. Intercepts are among the most sensitive types of information you can know about or not know about. The NSA more than doubled after 9/11, partly because it became so important to finding single individuals, which is what a lot of the business of counterintelligence is really about. And this gives you, again, some kind of sense of how big the building is, and then really how big the parking lot is. That gives you a sense of how many people might work in the building. And that's taken at night, and of course there are a lot of people there still at night. And then this was a real fun adventure because when we figured out that there was such a concentration here because of NSA, one of the reasons that there is because of the companies that are located just on its outskirts. Literally, these companies, which are located in an office park nearby, are connected by their own bridge to the NSA, and you can't use that bridge unless you have, the certain right passes. And this is just one building of maybe 30 or 40 buildings, each of this size, around that area. And this is at night. We were being followed at that point by the NSA police. But we were just taking pictures. And the other thing that's fun about this is that unlike the Booz Allen Hamilton is this company, it's 99.9% does government work now, and it has a small non-governmental. But it's really become the government's sort of shadow employee, and a lot of very experienced people work for BAE, and it proudly displays its name. Well, if you go down 66, which is one of the main highways out of Washington to the west, you are surrounded by the BAEs of this world, and they tend to be very low-key. But here they're blazing their, and this isn't the best example because there are a lot of them that have it in purple and red and yellow. They're, it's like their flag, very proud of what they're doing there. So this is a picture of the marbled wall of heroes at the CIA. And these stars are carved for the people who lost their lives in the line of duty. And it's here because one of the things we discovered was that contractors aren't just doing support activities like administration, payroll, and IT. They are, oh, that's all right, they're here. They are also in the fight in the most basic and fundamental way. There's a regulation that says contractors are not supposed to do inherently governmental functions, but they do that everywhere. In fact, most intelligence agencies now would have a really hard time operating without them, and some of them could not do that at all. In fact, the National Reconnaissance Office, that probably a lot of you are familiar with, it builds, manages, maintains spy satellites. It is vastly dependent on contractors, and there's just no way we could ever change that and hope to maintain the type of capabilities that we have now. So of the 22 people, of the 22 stars that are up on the wall after 9/11, 8 of them are for contractors. So contractors are also playing a direct role in the covert action programs of the CIA. Obviously, those people sacrificed the ultimate and were willing to go into harm's way. When I asked Leon Panetta, who at the time was the CIA director, if there's a problem with contractors, his response was, yes, we have a problem, because even the most dedicated are still beholden not to the American people and to the public's trust in a general way, but to their companies. And when is any profit-making company, and I don't mean this as a criticism of a profit-making company, because that's, what the country is based on, but when would a profit-making company ever say, no, we don't need that money. You don't need to spend that money. It's just not the dynamic. The dynamic is the opposite. And so you do find contractors who creatively make new projects, some of which are helpful and some of which are not. And then there's contractors who have a lot of fun. This is a DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, conference that I went to in Phoenix, and it was put on by the DIA, by their information technology section, which is gigantic. And this conference was, 5,000 people. And they were contractors who were selling their wares to DIA, and who were required, the larger of them, to donate fun time events. This event, I think, was put on by, I think it was Carasoft, a large IT company, and it's a casino night, and General Dynamics put on the big event, which was they hosted an outing in the ballpark there, which they took over the entire stadium, and contractors and the people that buy things from them spent the night schmoozing, dancing, drinking, eating, while oddly, the scoreboard was lit up with a film of the speech that the DIA director had given that morning. It was just kind of a surreal thing. He's talking about the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, while there's a little bouncing ball that's going across his every word, and the contractors and the government employees are laughing it up on the side. I thought it was really strange. I thought it amounted to, extortion and bribery both, because the government was saying, if you want to come, you got to subsidize this. And on the other hand, the companies that were willing to do that were willing to do it in part because they wanted to maintain good relations with the government that was going to pay them, et cetera, et cetera. This is a picture of the hubs throughout. You can see the clusters. I never really thought we did a great job on the map because in the newspaper you can't get the kind of fidelity that we could have gotten. Because we didn't want to show actual addresses, the map makers just wouldn't put dots sort of on top of each other. They made the dots bigger instead to represent the number of companies. But the density is really, if you were to look at it that way, the density is really pretty impressive. And then over to the side, using my other tool here, you can see the largest concentration. Here's Fort Meade, McLean, Tyson, Fairfax, Washington, Arlington, Dulles, Chantilly corridor, which is west of the capital, Fort Belvoir, which is south, Norfolk, which is where the Navy and Joint Forces Command used to be, Tampa, Special Operations and Central Command, Colorado Springs, Northern Command, the post 9/11 command that was set up there, then and on and on. And then I think this is the number of locations where top secret work is done. We had to go to the top secret level because when we started to count at the secret level, it was so overwhelming, and we knew we couldn't do that in our lifetime. You know, while there are almost 1 million people with top secret clearances, there are millions with secret clearances. Let's see. So what I've been talking about is mainly work that is aimed at finding and defeating Al-Qaeda overseas, or that's what it's supposed to be aimed at. This is a picture of how some of that technology and some of the practices is migrating to the United States. This is Memphis, Tennessee, the Real-Time Crime Center, and it is funded in part by the Department of Homeland Security, which has funded more than 70 intelligence fusion centers around the country, more than one in each state, or one at least in each state. And here, the Memphis police are really dynamic. They have taken what DHS has given them and really run with it and done a lot of really very impressive innovations. I mean, they're impressive for fighting crime. They're a little bit worrisome when you look at what they're doing and that they are turning some of it on to terrorism without really understanding much about that, without understanding much about that. These are cameras that are set up all over the city that all come into this crime lab and can be watched by a person like that. They have the license plate scanners that were so popular in Iraq and Afghanistan for making sure the right people were in the neighborhood and the bad guys weren't infiltrating. Now they're used up and down the eastern seaboard routinely through toll booth. Your license plate is now in a big database that wherever you to become a suspicious person, they could pull that data out. There's nothing wrong with that if it's used correctly, but we've seen time and again that ill-trained police and local sheriff's departments are not using things like this correctly and are not being discreet and focused in their efforts. We looked at more than 2,000 internal DHS and local police intelligence fusion documents that we got a hold of. And there were many instances in which Tea Party activists, anti-war demonstrators, environmental activists, animal rights people were being monitored by local police and sheriffs and then were being put onto the terrorism alerts and sent out to police in other parts of the state. So clearly there's a problem still with that. This is just another picture of, here we're driving around in a car. I'm driving with one of the detectives who've created a lot of the technology. One of the things he did, and then I'm going to wrap up in a second here. One of the things that he did that I was so impressed by was in an effort to get all the data he could. I mean, once you tell somebody, we want to get all the data we can on our citizens, and especially the people that might be doing something wrong, you're going to unleash innovation and imagination. And so John Harvey, he collected information from the energy company billing department about where people live. And in order to keep current on where everybody in Memphis that had electricity was living, he convinced them to give it to him, update it every day, so that if they needed to find you, they would know where your current address is. So again, that's not a bad thing if you've done something wrong. He also created a way to integrate the criminal records with the license plate scanner, so that once we drove around a public housing complex, and he pointed the camera at a particular vehicle, and the vehicle came up, and the vehicle was registered to the house that it was in front of, or the apartment. Then he clicked a button, and we could see through his computer all the other people that were living in that house. And I felt like I was sort of a peeping Tom at that point. But in his version, what he was doing was gathering information for force protection to make sure that if an officer went up to the door, they would know whether there was a convicted felon there, or someone who had, was out of jail, who had killed somebody before, or whether there was someone with an outstanding warrant. But it still felt strange. And by the time I left Memphis, I had a much better sense that, now in this age where commercial data on individual citizens is abundant, all it takes is a credit card to buy, and police departments now, like the Washington Post buys a lot of information, buys these databases so that when we do our research, we can easily find out not just your social security number, which is like so easy, you can't believe it, but we can find out probably every place you lived for the past 10 years. Well, the police department can do that too, and they don't necessarily need a warrant to do it. They can just buy it from a company. That fits into my last point, hopefully, and then we'll take some questions, which is, or my second to the last point, sorry. This kind of data collection on individuals is becoming key because the Department of Homeland Security, under Janet Napolitano, is on a new campaign. It's called See Something, Say Something, or it's otherwise known as Report Suspicious Activities, and they actually have something called the Suspicious Activity Reports, or SARs. It's what I call a dragnet approach to counterterrorism. There are many things that are successful, and we point some of them out in the book, have been highly successful in finding and destroying al-Qaeda and its supporters around the world. The dragnet effort does not have any evidence to date that has been successful, and yet the Department of Homeland Security, which is a post-9/11 operation, which is building a building that will be bigger than the Pentagon, and which still gets a D, if not an F, from a lot of the intelligence people that work with it for its value added, is now undertaking a dragnet approach to finding terrorists in the United States. I mean, luckily, it's not the only agency we have to rely on for that, because the FBI, which actually has been the agency domestically that has found real terrorist plots, is still doing its job. But as the money has been available and for other people to do that, there have been many people that stepped into that breach. So I want to just leave you with the thought that 10 years after 9/11, are we safer is a question that always comes up. And of course we're safer. We're much safer. And we're much safer because there are organizations in our government that have learned a lot since then and have become experts in how to find, analyze information that will lead them to terrorists. If you study what happened at the the killing of bin Laden and everything that led up to it, you can identify those groups. This small group of CIA analysts who knew everything there was to know about bin Laden and his associates and knew how to look for clues and knew how to piece the clues together. The Joint Special Operations Command, whose job has become manhunting and who's excellent at that job because they are focused on that mission, and they have learned to share information with each other, but also with the CIA and other intelligence gathering agencies that also have that job. And domestically, the FBI, who is and has been for a long time, the agency in charge of counterterrorism. I would argue that those are, and there are others, but those are not the majority of what we describe in Top Secret America. What we describe here are those, but they are also the collection of gigantic organizations, many of which do the same thing as one another, too many of which recreate the wheel in a pretty mediocre way. And that is what the concern expressed in this book is about. Unless, and our political environment at the moment and for the last 10 years has been, it's okay that the government tells us vague things about the threat because we trust the government to tell us the truth. It's okay that more is always the answer to any problem that has to deal with terrorism. But more, I would contend, has gotten us to a point where the thing is so big that it is collapsing on its own weight, that you can take out the good things, but you'll still be left with this, as one person put it, self-licking ice cream cone that consumes a whole lot of resources that we can now afford even less and doesn't actually produce the results that we need. And that large thing isn't making us safer, and I would argue, might be making us less safe because it is a diversion of resources and money. And that now is the time. Bin Laden's dead. It's been 10 years. We've almost killed off the al-Qaeda network. Yes, there are affiliates that have sprung up, but people know where they are. And yes, there will be attacks of one sort or another, and and that's just going to be with us. There are always going to be crazy people. The Oklahoma City bomber had nothing to do with 9/11. So we have to have an honest discussion that we haven't had if we want to stop the development of Top Secret America anymore. And that's the first component of that is to have an honest discussion about the threat. And the second one is to have a rational discussion about risks and what it is that we're really willing to spend and where. And I don't know exactly how you start all that, but that would be my conclusion. So thank you for listening, and I would like to take your questions now. And there's a microphone here for those of you who have questions. Hello. Do you want to take the mic?
This week in the Globe, there was a front page photo of a policeman from Milton, Massachusetts, which is as white bread as you can get. And he was in the interior of, looked like a half-track or a Humvee with all this electronic equipment. Is anybody keeping track of the number of abuses or proliferation of cases where local police have been emboldened by all this new technology given to them by all these new laws?
There isn't any easy way to do that because a lot of it is law enforcement sensitive, which is another
top secret
type of classification. And newspapers have tried. I've got a lot of calls from reporters saying, I want to find out what DHS is spending in our state. And DHS, surprisingly, can't really tell you because it gives a lump. I mean, this is oversimplifying it, but it gives a lump sum to the state, and then the state Department of Homeland Security gives it out. And those states tend to be now, not every state. States that have good sunshine laws are more open about it, but I don't know how to say this. I don't mean to be flippant about it, but the state police get very excited to be part of the counterterrorism effort. And in some ways, they take it more seriously than others. And so they protect this information as if it were classified and as if you knew it, somehow that would threaten national security. So I think that the ACLU has a website that has the past cases on it. And there are groups like that have been, and there's an electronic protection group, but I can't remember its name, that have been trying to collect cases. And then other than that, there are, some of this should be gotten through FOIA. Well, I don't ever use FOIA. Yes, thank you. They're really good too, and they really up on the law and on technology. So I'd say there's no easy route, but most of this stuff is not actually classified, and there should be an accounting for it.
A quick follow-up. Is there any way to monitor all these contracts?
There's no easy way to do it, but they're,
GAO or?
No, a lot of the contracts are available, but they're available in a very difficult way to look at them for a layperson, Yeah. There are websites that show government contracts. But if you knew of a company, for instance, if you could find out, and there really shouldn't be a reason why you can't, what your Homeland Security, what the Massachusetts Homeland Security Office is doing, how much money it has and where that money is going, that should be public record. And if it isn't, you should be able to have them create a public record because it isn't classified information. And, you bring up the point about the sitting in the Humvee or whatever it was. A lot of, not surprisingly, war technology has gravitated over here. The companies have repurposed equipment that they developed in Iraq and Afghanistan, some of the standoff biometric technologies that can take your fingerprint from afar, or that can do things like that without you knowing, so that you don't get worried that someone's looking at you. The cameras, that sort of thing, have been repurposed for law enforcement now. So I would expect that to increase as well, because the market overseas is dwindling, but there's a new market here. Yes?
Okay, you've emphasized the role of private contractors in the national security state, but there's another aspect to private industry's participation in the national security state that doesn't seem to get enough attention. With changes in the FISA, Obama has virtually turned the telecom companies into an adjunct of the national security and surveillance state. The NSA uses them to do deep packet inspection, which allows them to track almost everyone's email and phone calls and cable choices and many other matters like that. So these types of recruitment of private corporations that are oftentimes mandated are much more difficult to control and oversee than simply cataloging the number of private direct contractors in the security state. This is a kind of pervasive, creeping security state that's taking in companies that aren't direct subcontractors, but are performing even more important functions within a total surveillance society. So
Well,
that needs a much greater illumination.
I don't know a lot about that. What you're saying, I would agree with up to a certain point. I don't, yes, the telecoms are involved. I don't know much about that, and it's going to be very hard to get because that is all classified. I don't believe that tracking is the right word. I think maybe vacuuming up. I mean, it's different to have the digits that resulted, and that's probably not even the right word, from your phone call sitting in a pile of stuff that's bigger than this building than it is to actually put somebody on your phone to listen to what you're saying. So that's a very crude way of saying, I don't think we have a surveillance state yet, but the technology that you're describing is, part of a creeping something. Yes, I do believe, and these databases that exist now in the FBI, for example, the Guardian database, the impetus is if you have something that's interesting, let's use it in all sorts of ways. If we've got all this data, how else can we use it? And so if you got an administration that was, thought of it in one way and a Congress that agreed, you might get something much more radical than you have now. Hello.
Marcy Wheeler has intimated that perhaps James Risen's phone was monitored. Mm-hmm. And I suspect that you know that your phone has been monitored. I know that Seymour Hersh takes precautions when he talks to people over the phone. Is this pervasive throughout the journalistic community working with national security, since we know that AT&T in San Francisco had a machine that was logging all the information? As the previous questioner said, the stuff is going on.
Yeah.
Does the journalistic community actually take this seriously enough to do something about protecting their own information and sources?
Well, I, and the national security reporters try very hard to protect our sources. That is true. I have grave doubts that my phone is being monitored. And I can say that because I have sources that I regularly pulse to figure, or I used to. And I might be wrong, but I think it's a big deal to tap reporters' phones, and you have to get special permission all the way up to the Department of Justice, to the Attorney General. And that's because, the press is protected in some ways. So, I don't know. But yes, we do try to protect our sources. And I do think it's a big deal whenever we find out that a reporter's phone has been tapped or been surveilled or whatever. Yep.
Thanks. I'm tempted to add why tap their phones when you can see them at cocktail parties. But that might be a little over the top.
Really?
I think that the core issue that you happily alluded to has to do with priorities, and it has to do with definitions and people's understanding of national security. I'm one of those people who, when the first chance I had to vote for president, had moved to Massachusetts and had the pleasure of voting for George McGovern, who I think won only Massachusetts and Washington, D.C. in that election, and then was, I think, subsequently vindicated around some of the issues you're addressing, actually. The president spying on establishment candidates. But the point that George made had to do with our understanding of national security. It's our infrastructure, it's our schools, it's our recreational facilities, it's people being able to go to college, all of that. And if you talk about Homeland Security, quote unquote, even the language, but here in Massachusetts, you take the T, constant announcements, all kinds of new equipment, MIT partnering with the MBTA to install a special testing equipment that probably nobody in the room knows about in the Harvard Square station to test air quality. That stuff gets put in immediately, but meanwhile, the T service is collapsing. Every day there are problems. Every day there are delays. There's complaining about lack of funding, increased appeals for more commercial revenue, more advertising as a result. So I could go on, and I'd love to. But to bring it to a question for you, I don't think that what I call corporate media in this country, and I hope what this project will help make a difference in this respect, I don't think corporate media in this country do a good enough job getting that information in front of the American people so that we all have an appreciation for how much of our resources are devoted to the military and the police state, the secret, the top secret private military establishment, and on and on and on. We know about all the other, we fight, and I'll end with, wouldn't it be nice if one day people had to work as hard to do yard sales and bake sales for the Pentagon as they do for their local school.
I'm still looking for the question. But that's okay.
Well, the question is, are corporate media doing a sufficiently good job alerting the American people to, in order to to choose
Yeah.
the priorities properly, how much of our resources go to the military establishment and the secret
Okay. Well,
government that you're talking about?
I wouldn't agree with everything that you've said. I do think that there is a role for more traditionally defined national security. But on your question of do the corporate media do a good enough job putting these questions in front of you, my answer is absolutely not. And they do less of a good job than they used to. And I don't think it's because they're corporately owned. I think it's because we're in a total chaotic period in the transition of media, and my company, the Washington Post, had a 50% drop in its profits, and our newsroom is much smaller. Many more of those people are required to produce stories on a daily basis. Our investigative staff is half as big as it used to be. And we've been around for a long time, and we're owned by a very hands-off in terms of, telling us what to do, family. So I do think I would say we're in a media crisis right now. It's not going to get much attention because we're in so many other more crises. But I don't, and I don't know where it's going to come out, but I can just, sort of do my part and hope that, what I want to do is when we did the Top Secret America series, it blew all the records for hits, as they call them, clicks. We got 3 million people in 3 days. Well, that's certainly not why I did it, but I keep beating the editors over the head saying if you do good work, people might actually come to the site, not for the cute videos of the dancing bears, but of the, which we've had too, but of the, we have interactive charts here where you can put in your zip code, and we have lots of charts that explain the various agencies and how much work they do in different areas, and you can play on that. None of that was supposed to keep you on so that you would notice the ad to the side. But, maybe but someone who's counting that might think that that's another benefit. So, yeah, so I do think that, no, we're not doing a great job. So all you journalism majors. Yes.
I'm a journalism major.
Yay!
Actually, a member of the aforementioned
Okay.
corporate media. I have a problem infiltrating my own local board of education, much less a top secret government organization.
They're tough.
Oh, it is. Can you talk a little bit about developing human sources and where you find them? I mean, I've tried our local bars,
Yeah.
but teachers just aren't going there.
Try the Little League, Saturday Little League games. No, I'm not kidding. You have to. I've been doing this for a long time, so there are some people who are generals now that I knew when they were colonels. But you can find. But sources are found everywhere. I mean, I sometimes go and speak to groups that I don't really. You're not in this category, but groups that in Washington where I know they're going to be members of the military or the intel community, and I'm speaking because I'm hoping that someone will come up afterwards. And actually, I have some great sources, from those sorts of whimsical things, or from places. If you can get people out of their official environment where there's a public relations person hanging around, like the Little League, find out who their kids are and what they do, and then go there, and you're in a much more relaxed setting. People need to trust you first, and they are going to learn to do that if your reporting is not just fair, but it gives a texture and a context. I mean, the people that are involved in Top Secret America are mostly very honest, trying to do the best job they can people. They're not evil, monsters like some people would think. Even the people that developed the black sites, they might not have had great judgment, but they were doing what they thought was the right thing to do. And I approach my sources that way. One, because I think, that's the honest way to approach it, but it also works because then you're not disrespecting what someone spent their whole life doing. You're pretty much trying to say, I want to explain to people what you do. I mean, don't ever say that to someone in the CIA, but but you get what I mean. So that would be my... And human sources, I found, are so much more valuable than documents if you have to pick between the two. Because documents can say something, but the something that they're saying isn't necessarily what actually happened.
Hi. I just came out, so I'm a little bit ignorant about what you covered during the speech. But speaking of top secret documents, believe it or not, we have 141 pages of FBI investigation right after 9/11 about the ground operatives that were found with explosives and all that stuff. I'm not sure. This is only 11 days old. And we didn't think something...
Who was we? I missed that first part.
We, a group who filed the Freedom of Information Act. I'd love to show it to you, the journalism students here.
Okay.
And it is going to be public, hopefully, by Sunday night. And all of the pages have classified on July 2005 and stamped declassify on July 15, 2030. Do you know who makes these decisions, how the dates are established to classify and then not to classify, or open?
Well, I assume that they were classified the day that the person who's in charge of classifying documents got around to them and put the stamp on it. But the 25 years is, I believe the Clinton administration put that on the books, that things needed to be reviewed, and if they could at all be classified after 25 years, they should be.
But as far as I can tell, the transcription was completed on September 17, of all the testimonies and the passport and all the identities, but they were out there somewhere until 2005 when they were classified with FBI.
Yeah,
how does it work?
I'm not sure.
Would you like
have
to see it after the thing?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. See? Hi.
Before I ask my question, I want to start with, I understand and I agree with the criticisms. I apologize. Can everybody hear me? Okay. I understand and agree with the criticisms we have with the growth of the intelligence community and the whole defense complex since 9/11. But I also remember the criticisms the intelligence community received immediately after 9/11. And the growth has been a result of the 9/11 Commission and really an identified need for better intelligence. So where we are today is a safer America, but at a great cost. How do you propose that you increase transparency in an opaque business and reduce the scope of the intelligence community without reducing its capability?
There's no way that you can do that without inside government making an assessment of what works and what isn't working. And I just don't think, I haven't seen the various agencies doing that because there hasn't been the impetus for them to do it. For instance, take the DIA, which has grown, at least doubled in size since 9/11. And yes, we were fighting two wars, so you can understand. But unless people, are asked or made to go and look at what's working and what's not working, and maybe it shouldn't be done by those agencies themselves, how could you ever reasonably and rationally cut back on anything? And so far we haven't done that. On the transparency piece, in the conclusion of the book, I write a scene in which I'm sitting down with the counterintelligence official, senior, who's involved with the WikiLeaks assessment, who makes some really interesting observations about that. One is that in their investigation, they learned how, because so much is classified and that is on the IT systems of the government, the vulnerability of that is pervasive. The government IT managers, many of whom are of a generation that they don't appreciate how vulnerable they are. And his point was, that is only going to get worse. The government can never keep up with it. If we think that we can keep these secrets, we're fooling ourselves. So what we should do is we should decide what really needs to be secret and keep that secret. You know, the rules on classification were written, I want to say in the 50s or 60s. And for instance, top secret, it means unauthorized disclosure could gravely could gravely or severely harm the national security of the United States. Some of the things, let's go to the most extreme. Let's say you put a top secret classification on a merchant in Baghdad who has given you some good information. And human sourcing is often highly classified. And let's say that were to leak out and that person were to disappear. That would be a terrible thing in terms of a human cost. Would it put the national security of the United States in grave danger? No. That's one end. Technology is another. We are in a period in which technology evolves so quickly that as the enemy adapted to us and learned that, you know, we were monitoring their cell phones, or we were, you know, monitoring whatever, their houses, they adapted and took other measures, and then our technology caught up with that. You know, it's not like it used to be. So I just think that much less should be classified, and the whole counterterrorism effort around the world should be more openly discussed. The other reason being that we are all in this together. You know, when the prison stories came out, the Europeans went nuts. They said, you know, this is illegal, which it was. How dare the United States? There was a backlash that you could predict, an anti-American backlash. The CIA said, oh, this is going to ruin our relations. They're not going to trust us anymore. This is always what they say when they are trying to convince us to withhold information. And we do withhold a lot of information that we get because we're convinced that their argument is a good one. But the fact is, those relationships repaired themselves after a bump in them. And that's because terrorism is a real thing, and the best way to, and the most efficient way to fight it is with other countries. And that has been the way that real terrorists have been caught. And those countries know it, and yes, they may scream about it in public, but they're going to then work together with us in the future. So why is that a bad thing that the public know? Why should the public, you know, believe that the United States is the bad guy all the time because we do these things, when these things are benefiting the Europeans? I'm not going to, you know, opine on whether they're good things or bad things to have secret prisons, but the idea of working together with other countries seems to shock people in those other countries, and here, but in those other countries. Well, come on. You know, you can't have it both ways. If you want the U.S. to help use their amazing technology and our unbelievable sources around the world to fight terrorism in France and Germany, shouldn't the French and German population know that? So I think that in the long run, transparency is the answer. In the short, and there's less and less of a way to keep secrets secret, not only because of journalists who do this job, but also technology itself. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that was an excellent answer. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi. There seems to be two things. One is the secrecy and the transparency, and the other is the cost. Mm-hmm. I just noticed from the generation that's in college now, they give up more information about themselves than we would have ever known about a spouse you've been married to for 30 years.
That's for sure.
You know, pretty much everyone is walking around with a camera in their pocket and a GPS on them at all times.
Right.
everyone is aware that all their emails are being run through Google for algorithms so that you have your, either that or it's a coincidence that those commercials are coming up. I don't think, the younger people don't seem to be, I mean, they're putting out things, what they're doing, and there's a thing which you can put on that will track you.
Yeah.
So that your friends can see
Right,
where
I
you
know.
are. I mean, this is stuff when I was growing up, 1984, never dreamed of these kinds of things. And I just don't think there's any, with the younger people coming up, they're willing to trade all of this sort of fear of government for convenience. And convenience seems to be the most...
Or for socializing. I mean, this is the other thing. It's involuntary transparency, I call it in the book. It's just happening. I mean, it's happening. We got on LinkedIn. So we get a code name. We get an agency that we've never heard of before. We take our LinkedIn account and we put that agency in there. And oh my gosh, the biographies of people who work in the most secret organizations are right there. It's unbelievable. And these are the people with clearances who go through the OPSEC, courses. And, I mean, it doesn't say what projects they worked on, or sometimes it does, but you don't know what it means. But it confirms that a certain thing exists, and these are those people. So that's another reason why I think it's, putting your finger in the dike to think that you can stop this transparency that's coming about involuntarily.
Right, I understand that, but my feeling is that this generation coming up has really no concern of, like you could see the people asking questions, they have no concern about the government looking at them because if you're going to college and you've never opened a Facebook account with information, I mean, it's very unusual. That's something in and of itself. And also with the WikiLeaks, a lot of the information that came out was very embarrassing, as far as working with other countries. A lot of those cables and a lot of things might not be top secret, but they were very embarrassing things about the Palestinians working with other things like that. So I don't know, are you going to be able to do a lot of this sort of governments talking sort of secretly under the table things if there is all this transparency too?
Less and less. I really think. I also think the WikiLeaks incident is, shows us a whole lot of things. But to me, one of the things that I was surprised at was how good it made our government look. It was concerned about human rights. They were actually beating people over the head about it. Everything that came out was there really a huge surprise there? It was confirmation of things that people suspected were happening. And I was, I'm still surprised at how vitriolic some government officials are about WikiLeaks, because I think they are because they don't understand what you're saying, and they don't understand how vulnerable their own IT systems are. In the conclusion here, I go to this company called Traversa up near Pittsburgh, and it's a company that is contracted by a big private law firm will say to it, find the documents that are ours that shouldn't be out there that are out there, and it'll do that. Well, in fishing around for its clients, it has found what they call the dolphins in the tuna net. They've found a lot of classified information that government workers have brought home, thinking that they were going to do some of their work at home, knowing that they probably shouldn't, but they're going to do it anyway. And their kids have file sharing software on their computers, and the parents don't even know that. So the parents are on the same network, and the file share software is like opening your door, and the people who know to look around are going into your bathroom medicine cabinet and pulling out your antidepressant medication. Amazing stuff is out there. Do you remember Hugh Shelton, who used to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? His entire, it would be what he would give his confidential secretary to have her, do all of his business. It was out there, and other stuff that was just amazing. So we've got these parallel universes. One is the government, after 9/11 classifying everything, calling reporters traitors if they dared to try to poke into it. And then we have technology that is just busting it all open. So, yes.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
I want to pursue your commentary on government transparency a little bit further. I have a opinion, I guess, that despite the work that you've done and other people, good work, have done to put information out there, there's developed a sort of sense, not just in the government, but in the general public, that any effort to prioritize spending when it comes to the Department of Defense or to Department of Homeland Security, if it's saying a dollar is being taken away from either of those agencies, is looked at as being extremely politically risky or highly detrimental. So I'm wondering if you could opine a little bit on, as people get a bit more information about where the money is going, finding a way to overcome that and to say to our government, well, yes, maybe it is reasonable that that dollar isn't spent, on the DoD, but it's spent elsewhere.
I don't think you can. First, I agree with you. It is politically risky to cut back on anything in the national or intelligence budget. And you've already seen Leon Panetta stand up and say, it'll risk our security if you do. I don't think that you probably are going to see any of it until there's a better understanding of what the risks are. I mean, what is the threat that we face? And I don't know how you force that to happen. I mean, I'm just a journalist. I'm just going to write it. And you guys, you're going to have to figure out how to, go with that or go with more information. But I think that an honest debate about the threat is the beginning. And there aren't many people yet who are willing to do that. Maybe the budget situation will force some of that. I mean, if the Obama administration dips into the defense budget and it's going to have to justify itself, and maybe there'll be then a discussion about what it's cutting back. If they dip into the intelligence budget, I don't think you'll know about it because it'll be classified. So the last thing we want is for our enemies to know that, we can't spend $100 billion a year. So I'm not a very good, don't really have a great answer for you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
A quick comment and then a question. I've actually worked in IT at MIT for 14 years, and I left about 4 years ago. I can tell you that having done some work for people who have worked for three-letter organizations, it's one person in particular, when I went to his office to troubleshoot the computer situation, did not have a password. I was waiting for him to type in the password for his computer, and he just hit return because there wasn't a password. And this is somebody who has, but it was not even like a big deal to him at all. And me and my colleague that were there to help him, we were just like flabbergasted.
How old was he?
Definitely older, and you would know the name if you heard it.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like even the people who work in these organizations don't even take it all that seriously. And maybe there's good reasons for that because they know, I don't know, it's futile at some level. But that was just shocking to me at the time. My question is about my concern since then is actually about poor people and low-income people and their sort of inability to protect themselves, even if they wanted to, from all this stuff. I talk to a lot of people when I volunteer for things and do various stuff with nonprofits about their concern about being monitored and people watching their stuff, and that's why a lot of people actually don't get online, or even though there's a lot of benefits for them in other areas, they're very afraid because they're afraid that all kinds of stuff that they don't want out there is going to get out there. I don't know if you address this in a book or not in terms of because this term digital divide is out there, but it's also like just the understanding about if you went to a failing school and and you're got you're a single parent and you're working 2 jobs, you don't know about securing your stuff. You don't know about how to make sure that stuff that you want to be private is private. And I don't know if you address this at all or have any
I don't address the digital divide, but I do address in what I think is one of the more chilling scenes in the book about the Memphis police using the scanners and coming upon and basically misidentifying a car in a poor neighborhood in Memphis. And then maybe because I was there, they were embarrassed and they didn't just say, sorry, wrong car, but they created out of nothing a situation that could have, could have just blown up. It already, it resulted in somebody getting a $150 ticket for nothing. And she was quite upset. And then they were quite upset that she was upset. Anyway, I'm not going to tell you what it is. You have to buy the book. But but you can see how, I don't know how much local police have a lot of power. And so giving technology to them should, I think, be done carefully. And it can be abused. And
I guess my other quick follow-up question is about, there was an article here in the Globe maybe a year or 2 ago about how Boston police were taking away people's cameras and stuff when they were trying to record people being arrested or being beat up or whatever, harassed by the police. And I don't know if you just know from your own work, like, that seems like that's not okay. Like, that's not legal. What's the deal with that? I mean, if I'm
the
across the street
Photographers Association of America or something has been on the DHS's case about this, because taking pictures is one of the suspicious activities. And so a lot of professional photographers get harassed for taking pictures of bridges and that sort of thing. But a lot of normal amateur photographers do too. And I think that in the places where problems happen and then they get made into a public issue, the police learn a little bit and might be more careful the next time. And so that's the only lesson I can draw from it, is from the things that have happened in the past.
The gentleman was referring to here in Massachusetts was a lawyer recording police activity with his cell phone.
Oh, yeah.
And what you may not know, because it was just a little squib
Mm-hmm.
in the Boston Globe, the plaintiff, the lawyer, his case was upheld on appeal. So there's been a favorable court decision, but it may not be the last word on it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The police said that he was violating the wiretap law.
Hi. We'll do the last question. Better be good.
So you mentioned there's mountains and mountains of information out there that intel analysts can't even possibly get to. But you argue that we should cut the intelligence community. Would you entertain the idea that maybe the intelligence community doesn't necessarily need to be cut, but instead the resources need to be allocated better?
Yeah. I mean, I don't really, I'm not saying I know. I'm saying that I've seen a lot of waste, and I've seen a lot of departments that look like they're not doing a lot to add value. I mean, and it's not me seeing that, because, as you know, I can't see most of that stuff. It's other senior people inside who are critical of certain organizations for not contributing, something unique. Yeah, I definitely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.